hotels. And they know how to do suites, Las Vegas. And it was like some huge glass window, and looking out over the whole city, and it's like 11 o'clock at night. And it was a reception being hosted by one of the big investment banks on Wall Street, that has a different ring to it now, that were pitching us and hosting a dinner because they wanted to be the agents for a large round of financing we were going to do. And Joe and myself had been sort of done a series of these over a 2 or 3 week period as we were contemplating this big financing. And so I was sitting there like 11 o'clock at night, and in one hand I had this very expensive glass of red wine, and then in my other hand I had a truffle-infused Kobe beef burger. It's like about this big. It costs like $80 or something, and it's really good. And there's like a plate full of them on this buffet table, and it's 11 o'clock at night, and I'm holding this wine and this truffle-infused Kobe beef burger and thinking, this is a couple years after having literally been sitting in front of my dining room table with 12 credit card bills trying to figure out the game of Tetris wasn't pay next, and thinking like, what am I doing here, At midnight, the clock is going to strike, and something weird's going to happen. This will become like a Coke and a Big Mac. I'm going to wind up, on some corner somewhere, sweating over my bills. It's not real. It fortunately was real. So I really have seen kind of the whole range of things, from deep, deep dark valley to being on the other end of things, and having a really grand time now. Looking forward to, as Jim says, I think really changing an industry. But I think never losing sight of the original intention of Pandora, which is to introduce people to music and to help musicians find their audiences. I think we can really build a musician's middle class eventually someday. So I'm happy to talk about anything you'd like to talk about. So if people have questions, or feel free. Yeah. Yeah. The question was, how do we convince all those people to work for free for so long? It's kind of a complicated answer to that. I thought a lot about, how did that actually happen? I think it's a combination of things. I think first and foremost, the core idea, the Genome Project, I think people really believed in it, and it was a cool idea. And this demo we had built was, it worked, and as a user of it, when you typed in a song, and it was kind of like magic, and so we always had this underlying belief that eventually this thing's going to have its day. We just got to stick with it. So I think people always, never gave up in that core belief. The problem was, will we hang on long enough to do it? I think the second thing was you develop a certain amount of peer support. So you're kind of doing this alongside other people, and as time goes on, you do it not just for the kind of this personal goal you have, but you do it for the person sitting next to you who sacrificed a lot over a long period of time. I think like a lot of sort of adverse things you go through, and so there's a collective action that happens to sustain you. I think those are the two big ingredients. You have to be able to inspire people. You have to trust them, and you have to lead by example. We were the first ones to give up salary, and last ones to take it, and those kind of things all combined. Yeah. Yeah, in the back.
My question is, as an entrepreneur, we start out owning 100% of nothing but an idea, and what we hope for is, or hope not to happen, is when it gets to be something that's really huge, we don't own 0% of something that's huge. And how do you manage the process where you're trading equity or trading those pieces where you bring participants into your organization, and still manage that as a process where you don't lose control of that as your business gets larger?
Yeah, it's a good question, and the short answer is you can't have your cake and eat it too. If you go way down the alphabet like we did on your funding rounds, you're going to get diluted. And if you have to add people, you need to incentivize them and give them ownership. I would say by and large, this is an unscientific observation, that I think people are generally too cautious and stingy with equity for others. I'm a big believer in having a smaller piece of a bigger pie. So I think you have to kind of get comfortable with that. It's very, very rare, I'm sure some of the investors will tell you, for a founder who is with a company for a long period of time, or there's two things that are rare. One is to launch your company and just go like this, and have funding rounds where you have all the negotiating leverage and they're oversubscribed, et cetera, and you can retain all these, ownership and your special voting rights, et cetera. That's a very unusual situation. And if you don't have that, then over time you're going to have to do some compromise. But don't let that gnaw at you. Accept it and embrace it and recognize that it takes a lot of people to do what you're going to do and be okay with it. Because there's nothing worse than I'll tell you what. If during those dark times, if we hadn't been generous with equity, there'd be nobody in the building. When people were deferring salary, they were also getting options. It was really, you wanted people to feel like owners. Yeah.
If you were to redo it all over again, what would you do differently?
I'm sorry, say again?
If you were to redo it all over again, what would you do differently?
There's one, when we were when we had 25 grand left in the bank, sometime in 2001, we had a serious conversation about going to Reno and putting it on black. And that's a perfectly rational economic discussion to have, that actually the chances of getting an investor to pry open their wallet is much, much lower than winning, 49% in Reno. But we decided that was inappropriate for us to do. I kind of regret that we didn't do that. That would have been fun to have done it. But I don't actually have, I don't look back and say, gosh, if only we had done this. Because so much of what we did over the years was reactive. We were confronted with a situation, a set of externalities or circumstances, and that we had to just adapt to. Should we have launched radio a year or two earlier? Should I have not? Maybe I shouldn't have tried to fundraise as much as I did. I might have changed that, but I don't look back and say this would have been so much easier if I'd known this. We were kind of stuck with circumstances to some extent. Yeah.
Does Pandora plan to IPO this year?
No, we can't talk about it.
Come on, a little bit? Just a little bit?
We plan to build a big standalone company in the long run.
Now you have lawyers.
What's that?
Now you can afford lawyers.
Now I can afford lawyers.
Can you tell the story of how your involvement in the schools helped your lobbying efforts overall to you?
Sure. So one of the interesting episodes for Pandora was around royalties. We pay licensing fees for the songs that we stream, and those fees are controlled through Congress. It's actually a federal statutory license that gives us the permission to play music, and we pay composers and performers under that umbrella. And every 5 years, that fee is arbitrated in front of a set of judges in the Copyright Office. And a few years ago, kind of 2007, that panel coughed up its ruling that was retroactive 2 years and ran through 2010, so this 5-year period, and it was just kind of a disaster. It kind of overnight, it essentially destroyed our business because it made our single largest cost, which is licensing, just like 3 times larger, something like that. And we were actually getting ready to pull a plug. I'm sure Jim remembers the joyful board meeting that we had shortly afterwards. Like, what should we do? He's looking at his X millions just going down the tubes. And we decided, we appealed it. They wouldn't hear our appeal, and we tried to negotiate with labels. They weren't willing to, and so we organized a political campaign. And we emailed our listeners. Fortunately, we had their zip codes, so we actually sent targeted emails saying, "Hey, Pandora's going to go under. If you want us to stick around, please call your congressional representative. Here's their name and phone number." And we had this absolutely overwhelming response. Hundreds of thousands of people called, sent faxes, and visited their congressional district offices, and created so much energy around the issue that Congress intervened and called a hearing in DC, and some very senior members authored some legislation to get it put back, and we got, over the course of the next year, 2 years, we renegotiated and managed to survive. So it was a hairy time, but it was a time we were certainly very happy to have had a good, close relationship with our listeners, for sure.
I just want to say, let's have one more question.
All right, great.
So is the central character in the story, other than funding, did you have any other one magnanimous personality that came in to drive you forward?
It's impossible to point to one person. There are so many people that played key roles for us at various times, investors, vendors, employees. I think it would do a disservice to name one, but there were a lot, and we have a lot of people to be thankful to, for sure. Thanks for your time, you guys.